Hi, welcome to CinemaSpection. I'm Tim.
I'm Corinne.
I'm Kyle.
Of the many films Alfred Hitchcock has directed, there is one that has come to represent him as a director in popular culture. One that helped redefine the horror genre and push the boundaries of what could be presented on film. One that made many viewers think twice before stepping into the shower. We're going to check into the Bates Motel and discuss Psycho from 1960. Secretary Marion Crane feels time slipping by regarding her relationship with her boyfriend Sam, and is growing restless waiting for him to pay his debt so they can marry. She impulsively steals $40,000 from her workplace and flees town to meet up with Sam, but makes an unfortunate choice to stop at the rundown Bates Motel. There she encounters the appealing but awkward proprietor, Norman Bates, and has the bad luck to meet his homicidal mother as well, starting a chain of events that will expose the horrors hidden beneath the motel's bland facade. Now, usually we stick in a clip from the trailer, but in this case, we have to make special mention of the amazing marketing for this movie. The trailer for this movie is 6.5 minutes long and contains no footage from the movie. Instead, in an incredible masterstroke of marketing, it's Hitchcock himself just giving sort of a post-mortem of the motel location and all the events that took place. I was trying to think if there's a clip I could use for the little trailer clip, but I can't really, and I almost think I shouldn't anyway, but man, that trailer is incredible.
There's something very William Castle about the way he introduces it. He's building hype for the film by taking himself and saying, look, it's a film, and I'm going to show you at the same time what's happening. So it's almost like an Unsolved Mysteries intro to it. He does give away a lot more than I would have expected in that trailer, but I'm not sure what trailers looked like at the time, and that may have been more customary.
And it does really trade off on the fact that now he's on TV on Alfred Hitchcock Presents and everyone expects him to come in and do a little intro to the story, so...
To the point where you'll notice partway through the trailer, you can see that trademark silhouette.
I did notice that against the wall, yeah. And all of his little, he's about to give something important away, like, this is important because, well, you know what, let's go over here and look at this thing instead. As usual, we'll be discussing Psycho in detail, and if somehow you miraculously haven't seen this movie and don't know about some of the startling twists it contains, you owe it to yourself to watch the film before listening to the rest of this episode. Psycho was released by Paramount Pictures on September 8th, 1960. The rights were later sold over to Universal. It was shot on a budget of $800,000 and made $50 million at the box office. Adjusted for inflation now, that would have been $592 million.
And interestingly, Hitchcock put up his own money for the film. So all of that money basically went right back into his pocket. He took a huge risk. This is a story a studio would not have paid for, and it paid off, actually.
And supposedly even he was pretty surprised by just how well it did. Despite some initial bad reviews, which that kind of stuns me, the movie was nominated for 4 Oscars. It was nominated for Best Director, but Hitchcock lost to Billy Wilder for The Apartment. Janet Leigh was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, but she lost to Shirley Jones from Elmer Gantry. It was nominated for Best Black and White Cinematography, lost to Sons and Lovers, and Best Black and White Art Direction, but lost to The Apartment. The film did win an Edgar Allan Poe Award for Joseph Stefano for his screenplay. Anthony Perkins won Best Actor from the International Board of Motion Picture Reviewers. And Janet Leigh won the Best Supporting Actress Golden Globe. And of course, the movie is based on the novel by Robert Bloch. Okay, so what's everybody's first experiences with Psycho?
All right, so my first experience is probably the only experience like this. So when I was 4 years old, my dad went to Universal Studios in Florida. When he came home, he had a VHS that was an old 80s, like, hour-and-a-half advertisement basically saying, look how great Universal is, look at all the rides we have. One of the things they focus on is the California Psycho set, where you could take your picture with Norman Bates and everything like that. And that house was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen at that point. That was before I saw Jurassic Park, so around the same time, that Jurassic Park and the house and they showed in that video, which just terrified me. Yeah. So obviously I get older as a teenager, I get into horror movies and everything. And then, you know about Psycho as being the first slasher. Is what everybody says. My dad told me. And I think I might have been like 14 or 15. My dad had a copy of it because he's a horror buff. So of course he did. And I just watched it one night when everybody was sleeping. And I think what shocked me was how slashery it was. It was one of the first like real black and white horror movies I watched. And I was expecting to feel older, and it felt more modern than I was expecting. And I think that's what really blew me away from that movie.
This is just one of those films I think I've always known. Given my film history, chances are my mom let me watch it when I was too young. So I have nothing really to add.
This is one case where I can't really pinpoint the first time I saw the film straight through, really.
I'm shocked.
It's one of those ones my mom always had on. She was a big Hitchcock fan, still is. And this and Rear Window, a lot of these movies I'd see little bits of here and there. I think actually I saw a lot of this movie in other places, like in Terror in the Isles and all these other horror compilations, and saw scenes like the shower scene and the final reveal of Norman. So when I did finally sit down and watch it, whenever that was, I don't think I went in being surprised by anything. I think I pretty much knew all the big twists and beats to it.
Oh yeah, me too, 100%.
Yeah, but it is a shocking, amazing movie. I totally understand what you said in terms of it feels a lot more modern than Hitchcock's other movies. Even the movie right before this, North by Northwest, it feels like just a huge shift between those two films in Hitchcock's style and how much more modern this feels.
Oh yeah.
But I've always been a fan of this. I remember actually dressing up as Norman Bates for Halloween, and everyone thought I was the church lady with the knife, apparently. So let's talk about what this movie meant for Hitchcock and how much of a shift it was from what he normally did. So he's coming off of North by Northwest, huge success, but still stinging from the failure of Vertigo, where he tried to do something really dark and personal and it kind of backfired. And Hitchcock decided to change his focus away, move away from really glamorous movies with big stars. And apparently he saw things that AIP was doing in terms of low-budget horror movies and thought, well, why can't I do that? If they're making a ton of money, I should be able to make a ton of money and make a big splash with that. It does kind of remind me of that Stanley Kubrick kind of slumming in a horror vibe that kind of came off of The Shining.
Well, the attitude of it, definitely. Like, I'm going to tackle this subject and elevate it. And you know how horror fans hate the phrase elevated horror, but that's exactly what
they hate it.
I know. And I agree to a point, but that's exactly what they were trying to do. Both Hitchcock and Kubrick already viewed themselves as auteurs. They are masters of their craft. So they should be able, if anyone, they should be able to make masterpieces out of horror.
Yeah, where, I mean, horror wasn't really taken seriously for a while. There is this feeling of, oh, what a novelty. I'll try one of these. Won't this be kind of fun to see what I can do with this? Because of the subject matter and because he was doing it with his own money, since he didn't really want the studios to have too much input on this, he elected to shoot the movie with technicians and crew from his TV show, so they could do it very quickly. There would be very little studio interference. In fact, the director of photography shot about 75 episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and that's one of his primary credits.
Part of the appeal for Hitchcock was the small budget and the experiment of working with his film crew, an actual full-length feature film with the constraints of a TV budget and a TV crew.
And it's almost like Hollywood borrowed that structure and used it for years and years and years to this day. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's like Blumhouse's model.
Yeah,
right there.
yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Also, funding it himself allowed him to take risks, like you said, that studios would not have allowed for. He did some things, I know we're going to talk about later, that were pretty scandalous at the time. And he was only risking his own money, so he had the freedom to do that.
And I have to say, in terms of the violence that you see in Hitchcock movies, this feels very different. I mean, lots of people get killed in his movies, but it never feels like, I won't say there's no weight to it, but it's not really horrific or depressing or anything like that. I mean, you look at North by Northwest, where that dude is stabbed to death in the middle of the UN, and it's almost kind of a gag, and it just kind of goes away, and you move on with the plot. And yeah, it gets Cary Grant in trouble, but you don't linger on it much.
But that murder in North by Northwest, it's to further the plot. It's not central to the plot.
But I feel like in most of his movies, none of the violence really has an emotional heft like it does starting with this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think in other movies he's using a Hollywood type of violence. You know, the violence is very over the top, exaggerated, like it was at the time. But I think Psycho was down to earth. The violence was almost depressed, like it was sad to watch. It wasn't scary. It was just sad. And I think it was that realism that really makes Psycho stand out.
It was naked.
Yes, that's good.
Literally naked.
And for once, really, we see the gruesome aftermath. It's not just like somebody gets stabbed and we move on. We have to deal with, there's blood all over the place, and now there's a body, and it leaves people behind.
And by adding the detective work after the murder, it's almost like this is just a murder. This isn't a killer. Like, this wasn't a fun Hollywood killer. We're literally, as the audience, investigating a murder that we witnessed. And I think that almost like realism to the detective's work after it that makes the murder actually more terrifying.
And we have to see the effect that Marion's disappearance and, as they later find out, murder has on Lila and Sam. It's not just she's gone and, the plot can just keep moving along, it's fine. We linger in that and how concerned they are and how horrified they are once they find out what really happened to her. And I feel like from here on in, you look at The Birds, and there's a lot of scenes where characters die in that, and it is traumatic for the characters, and it is horrific, and we see the horrible aftermath. Torn Curtain has that amazing murder scene that takes like 5 minutes with Paul Newman struggling to kill this guy, and it takes so long, and it's so drawn out and torturous. Marnie, same thing, and there we really focus on the after effects and the trauma of violence and what it can do to somebody. There are some really interesting tricks that Hitchcock uses. Of course, one of his hallmarks is using projection screens a lot. He was a big control freak, so whenever it came to shooting stuff on location, he'd much rather have an actor in front of a screen, shot in front of some plates from a location. And we definitely see that here, but the fact that he could shoot at Universal and build the Bates Motel set and the house definitely allowed him to open it up a little bit more than he normally would. And there are a few suspense techniques here that I think are absolutely brilliant and almost subconscious that other filmmakers would definitely pick up on. One of my favorites is, and we see this twice in the movie, and almost a third actually, like scene with a character going towards something that we discover is dangerous and the intercutting of it. Like Marion is driving up to the Bates Motel. We see her point of view and we cut back to her reaction. And then we see a little bit more of her point of view as she gets close to the motel and we cut back to her reaction. And a little bit more as we, see the house and her reaction. And then we see that later on with Lila as she's going up to the house. That it normally we just get her, she looks up at the house, she starts walking, she's at the porch, we go in. But Hitchcock takes the time to show the whole climb up that hill, intercutting between she's close to the house, Lila's reaction. And if you look at that, you'll see that echoed in Halloween, the scene where Jamie Lee Curtis goes to the murder house. Again, Carpenter could just skip that, but no, he lets us see Jamie Lee Curtis go that whole way.
Yes.
And watching it, since we know Marion goes to the motel and gets killed, subconsciously, now that we see Lila going toward that house, we're geared up to think, she's going to get killed too. We saw what happened last time we had this kind of rhythm to the editing to that character. She got killed.
But also taking the time to show a character's reaction to a location makes the location a character. It's very important for Psycho, but it's also very important for Halloween. The idea of this house, this location being so central to everything happening. It is a character.
Yeah, I mean, even the smallest details, the room full of birds, the motel sign, they add so much detail to the characters that they then become icons. You can literally just show a poster of the Bates Motel sign, everybody freak out.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what.
And also, while part of it was a budgetary concern, the decision to go back and shoot in black and white. I mean, yes, it's budgetary. Yes, he knew that the blood was going to be a problem otherwise. But it also leads to so many incredible compositions where the lighting has this film noir harshness to it that, again, you wouldn't have seen in too many of his films right before this, where everything was a little bit more glamorous and designed to make the actors look really nice.
Speaking very quickly about the 1998 Vincent remake, that one is in color, and I don't want to get into how much I hated that color, besides saying that color was abysmal, but it had a cluttered look to it. The color really took away from the story. Having it in black and white made it very clear what we were to focus on.
Yes.
People going into this film, they wouldn't have had much idea of what it was. There was a lot of secrecy. When Hitchcock was filming this, he actually swore all the cast and crew to secrecy. They couldn't reveal anything about the movie to anybody.
I wish that would happen so much more now, and I do appreciate that. In fact, when he does the trailer, usually in trailers you would see clips of the movie, but he's decided the secrecy has to remain as firm as possible, where he'll give you little hints about what might be going on, and whereas I feel like he may have said too much, he showed nothing.
And that became his policy for the rest of the movies he shot. He would always swear the crew to secrecy and control the information himself. But then he'd leak out little rumors. Like when it came to the character of Norma Bates, he started dropping little rumors about who might be cast in the part, including he dropped some rumors that Dame Judith Anderson, who he had directed in Rebecca, and Helen Hayes were possibly in the running.
Which is, again, a lesson from William Castle. How much can you put out there to cause a scandal? How much can you put out there to get people talking about the movie before it comes out so that people will go see it?
Basically, the marketing technique is to make it a cultural event. It's like basically how the public nowadays treats Christopher Nolan movies.
Right.
People go to these movies because they don't know what they're about. The trailers are purposely ambiguous, and especially since it's after North by Northwest, like he did this incredibly smart technique of just trying to be as secret as possible to make people more excited about it.
The big thing, though, and this had a far-reaching effect on the way we see movies, was the theater policy. He realized at the time that back then people would just kind of show up into a movie whenever and just kind of hang out and stick around for another show. And he started to realize if somebody comes into this movie an hour in, they're not going to see Janet Leigh, and they're going to get very confused, and it's going to ruin the effect. So they made it an ironclad rule that you had to see Psycho from the beginning. You were not allowed to come in even a minute late. You were either in from the beginning or you didn't get to see it. And they enforced this with the security guards at the movie theater, and they had all these displays of Hitchcock pointing at his watch and pointing at you saying, no, you have to see this on time. And from then on, it became much more of a habit for people to just come at the beginning of a movie, not to just wander in an hour in.
That's insane.
I actually love it.
I love it too.
I am that person who goes to the theater who needs to be settled in, who wants everybody to shut up and turn their phones off. And unfortunately, that's not possible. I can't control an entire theater's worth of people as much as I'd like to. But the experience of film has changed so much because of this. Film structurally has changed character-wise. You really need to have every second of film viewed to appreciate a film as a whole post-Psycho.
That adds so much to the atmosphere of the movie itself.
Yeah, it becomes an event.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
People start wondering, oh my God, what's in here? What are they going to show me that absolutely must be kept secret? Apparently the same trick had been used for Diabolique, which is a movie that Hitchcock had hoped to direct but wasn't able to. He was quite frustrated in that regard. So, all right, that brings the question. With the way movies work now and film Twitter and everything else, do you think if it were being released for the first time now, Psycho would work today?
I would like to say it would. Unfortunately, there's so much information out there, and there's so many people exchanging information about what is happening on set or what could happen on set or fan theories. People would have read the book. Speculation would have been everywhere. And then, of course, because there's so much hype, there would have been that disappointment because nothing can live up to that.
No, and I could already see the headlines from, like, Ain't It Cool News or like
exactly
something like bloody disgusting. I see North by Northwest director Alfred Hitchcock's next film or supposed horror movie rumored to be slasher.
Exactly.
I could already see like the headline. At that point, I would just be, oh, cool, an Alfred Hitchcock slasher film. I wouldn't. The surprise isn't there.
A leaked blurry photo of Anthony Perkins in drag, and like, oh, what does this mean?
Exactly, like the really far shots. Somebody has a drone over the hotel or motel.
I mean, back then, and Hitchcock was kind of able to do this, he tried to buy up as many copies of the book as possible to get rid of them so people wouldn't be able to read it and know the story in advance. Nowadays, yeah, that just wouldn't work. I think Psycho and its plot twist sort of influenced this idea of having such a giant plot twist in your movie. So it's a little weird to think if Psycho hadn't existed, would plot twists have the same weight that they have now? Would directors, I assume somebody would have done it, and I'm sure somebody did it before Psycho. But
yeah, I was going to say, I'd argue that there were many films that had plot twists before.
But on this level, yeah.
Well, part of it is that we think it's this level, but it's really because Hitchcock was so popular and this film exploded. And because you had to see it from the beginning, you were ensconced in this. It wasn't as if you were wandering into Freaks halfway through. So when you get to the ending scene, it's like, oh, look, that's weird. It doesn't become a full thematic connection, whereas it would have in Psycho, being forced to see it beginning to end.
Maybe call it like a cultural plot twist. Like, there are movies that have plot twists, but then there's plot twists that literally make the movie. And, I mean, like, Psycho, I think, really is the first one to have done that.
I mean, if it didn't have the plot twist, it would still be an amazing thriller, but that is really the thing that propelled it into, I think, the public consciousness to the level it did. All right, so let's move on to somebody I don't think really gets enough credit for the success of this movie, the screenwriter Joseph Stefano. Stefano, his primary thing beyond this was he was one of the big motivating factors behind The Outer Limits. He was a producer and wrote a whole bunch of episodes of that one. He'd also write the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Skin of Evil, the one that killed Tasha Yar, as well as writing for the Swamp Thing TV show and the Psycho 4 The Beginning prequel, which actually is pretty good.
In his defense, I was informed that the episode of Star Trek was possibly rewritten heavily.
Most of those first season ones
So
were, yeah.
probably not his fault that Tasha Yar episode occurred in the way it happened.
And I still kind of like that episode. It's funny, I watched this goofy movie, The Kindred, last night with Rod Steiger, and it turns out he co-wrote that one too. He wasn't the first writer. James Kavanaugh, a writer on the Alfred Hitchcock Presents show, tried and couldn't quite crack it. And Stefano, looking at the original book, he changed a lot of things that make the film work much better. The original book, it's okay, it's not great. It starts off with Norman Bates. The first scene is Norman Bates in the motel, and he meets Marion, and then we get a flashback to who Marion is very briefly, and then building up to the shower murder. Stefano had the idea of, let's just start with Marion and draw out her whole crime and make the movie about that for the first half hour. So we meet Marion, we discover her problems, she makes this rash decision to steal from her business, we see the effects of that, how much it makes her paranoid, and it's not until a half hour in that we meet Norman, and all of a sudden the movie goes on this whole other trajectory. And it gives us the time to actually get to know Marion and sympathize with her and think the movie's going to be about her and that she's the heroine, and all of a sudden, boom, she's gone.
Changing the structure actually helps the story quite a bit because it does establish Marion as the main character, so her death is a shock, but it also allows for us to not be inside Norman's head. We don't need to be inside Norman's head. In fact, the further away we are from it, the more of a shock the revelation is.
And that's the thing. With the novel, you can cheat and have Norman having a conversation with his mother, and we don't understand yet that it's in his head. In a movie, it would have been tough to do that early on and not make it obvious that something's weird about how this scene is playing out. There were a couple other more minor changes. The shower murder is actually a lot more gruesome in the book where Norman actually chops her head off. I'm very glad they pulled back on that.
Wow.
They wouldn't have been able to show that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the same year as Peeping Tom. This is 1960, and Peeping Tom ruined Michael Powell's career. So can you imagine if Hitchcock was like, we're not just going to kill her, we're going to behead her? That would never happen.
Yeah.
Especially post North by Northwest Hitchcock.
Right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it was Stefano's idea to force the film to show a flushing toilet. Originally in the book, one of Marion's earrings gets left behind, and that's the big clue they find. And he thought, well, no, we'll make it a piece of paper, and she flushes it, and then they find a tiny little bit of it left in the toilet.
Well, it was already so scandalous to show a bathroom, and to show a bathroom in such an intimate way, someone getting ready to use the shower. This was taboo, especially post-code. And to show a toilet was unheard of. It was actually considered vulgar.
You look at any bathroom, in a movie before then, there's just that odd absence of the toilet.
Right.
There's your sink, there's your shower, but never the toilet. And also, Stefano was in analysis at the time, and he brought a lot of material from his sessions and interest in psychology into the story. It was his decision to have the explanation for what was wrong with Norman come from a psychologist and not in the book where Sam just suddenly explains all this at the end to Lila, which just feels very goofy and bizarre.
It's a cheap ending.
Yeah, how would Sam know that?
I guess it's like, I heard this at the police station. Here's what happened. Here's what they told me, and I'll explain it to you. Having an actual psychologist do it and use the terminology feels a lot better. It feels a lot more real.
It's coming from a place of authority rather than secondhand information, which could just be gossip.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Janet Leigh as Marion Crane. I do love that the movie positions her as the main character, but in the end, she's kind of a MacGuffin. She's kind of the classic Hitchcock MacGuffin. It's just a person this time instead of an object.
Yeah, she's just the reason everyone has to come investigate and expose the Norman situation.
Yeah, her situation is actually what drives the film. The position she's in is the reason why she's at the Bates Motel. So it's the initial crime that really is the crucial plot point to Psycho. And
where normally it would feel like the money is the MacGuffin, Lila and Sam don't care about the money. They just care about Marion, and she's the thing that keeps them moving and keeps them investigating.
Yeah, once Marion dies, the money is secondary. But until Marion is killed, the money is the whole point.
I do kind of love that we're made to think this money is so important, and in the end it's just sort of cast in the swamp. Boom, gone.
The money is really about Marion. The character whose name is escaping me, the oil baron.
Mr. Cassidy, I think his name was.
He said that he doesn't carry money, he can't afford to lose. So we're already being told he has a lot more money than this. So the money, it's pretty inconsequential, but it matters so much to her and her morality. And I know this is something we'll go into later when it comes to talking about costume changes and colors of cars and such. But the first half of the film with Marion is an internal struggle between purity and corruption. She's important in that because Norman also struggles a little bit with that. The side of him that is Norman is trying hard to not be what he is. And the side that is Norma is his impulses unleashed.
And I think it's interesting. The money to her is more just a means to an end to Sam.
Right.
That's her focus on it. She's not looking for the good life or anything like that. She just wants to help Sam pay off his debt so she can have him.
But it's not just have him, because she has him. She just does not want him in a way that she feels like is seedy. She wants a marriage. She wants to be able to not sneak around. She wants a respectable life.
A couple of years and my debts will be paid off. If she ever remarries, the alimony stops.
I haven't even been married once yet.
Yeah, but when you do, you'll swing.
Oh, Sam, let's get married.
Yeah. And live with me in a storeroom behind a hardware store in Fairvale. We'll have lots of laughs. Tell you what, when I send my ex-wife for alimony, you can lick the stamps.
I'll lick the stamps.
It's basically Marianne's show to him that I'm yours. It's basically kind of like the prove it to me, prove it you love me. That's how she thinks in her mind she could prove it to him by paying off his debt. So even though he is hers, to her, he isn't hers yet. Do you know what I mean?
To me, I always look at it as this is Marion grappling with the fact that she's getting older. She feels like her opportunities for love might be passing her by.
Well, we're told that blatantly. Again, the oil baron talking about his baby, his 18-year-old who is getting married. And we've already established that Marion has not been married and that she wants to settle down. This is a point where she's ready to settle down, and being confronted right away with somebody who's like, yes, my 18-year-old baby is getting married and I'm setting her up for life and she's going to have it easy. And that's all very appealing, and it's very seductive, and it does lead her to grabbing the cash.
And one of the things, again, that makes this so effective is that we do grow to sympathize with her. We get to see all of her problems in this internal life. And how often do we see that in a slasher movie where the victim is given this much time to imprint themselves on us? I mean, you could imagine the novel version of this where we'd meet her just when she shows up at the motel, and then we get a really brief flashback showing her steal this money, and then boom, she's gone. And it wouldn't work. It would just not be effective.
I also think it's really effective that Marianne's a thief, she's a criminal, she stole the money, but Alfred Hitchcock doesn't present her in a way that makes us hate her for her
No,
crimes.
not at all.
I think that's a really, really hard line to ride. You could really screw that up.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the delicacy they have Marianne with that really makes a death even more tragic.
And one of the brilliant things about that is that we're forced to see a duality between Marion and Norman. That Marion commits this crime, she's not a very good criminal, and we see that when she's trying to cover it up, when she's trying to talk her way out of the thing with the patrolman, or when she's at the car salesman, she's awful at this. She's so suspicious. She just keeps making these terrible mistakes.
Have I broken any laws?
No, ma'am.
Then I'm free to go.
Is anything wrong?
Of course not. Am I acting as if there's something wrong?
Frankly, yes.
Please, I'd like to go.
Well, is there?
Is there what? I've told you there's nothing wrong, except that I'm in a hurry and you're taking up my time.
Now, just a moment. Turn your motor off, please.
And we see the same thing with Norman when Arbogast shows up, and he's trying to be Mr. Cool, but he keeps making a little slip of the tongue here, something in his demeanor that makes it clear that he's lying. They're both kind of terrible criminals. And Norman isn't the only one who has voices in his head. We actually have this dramatized with Marion, where as she's driving, we hear her imagining these reactions to what she's done and the trouble she's going to be in.
Well, I ain't about to kiss off $40,000. I'll get it back, and if any of it's missing, I'll replace it with her fine, soft flesh. I'll track her, never you doubt it.
Oh, hold on, Cass. I still can't believe it must be some kind of a mystery. I can't.
You checked with the bank, no? They never laid eyes on her, no? You still trusting? Hot creeper, she sat there while I dumped it out. Hardly even looked at it. Planning, and even flirting with me.
So let's move on to the amazing central character, Norman, or Norma. Huge difference in this depiction of Norman as compared to the book. In the book, he's overweight, he's alcoholic, he's really kind of unpleasant. And I think it's a brilliant thing to instead cast Anthony Perkins and make Norman kind of charming. I mean, he's really awkward, and as we see, he's quite creepy. But at the same time, when he shows up, even though I've seen this a bunch of times, I'm so sympathetic to him in that first scene with him and Marion, where he's trying to be charming and he's just so awkward and he's like a little puppy or something. He's just so eager to please.
Well, the mattress is soft and there's hangers in the closet and stationery with Bates Motel printed on it in case you want to make your friends back home feel envious. And the, over there.
The bathroom.
Yeah. Well, if you want anything, just tap on the wall. I'll be in the office.
Thank you, Mr. Bates.
Norman Bates.
He's childlike.
He's awkward, but also Anthony Perkins has this very open, honest face. Or at least that's what he shows us at first with Norman. I mean, as time goes on, obviously we are shown what an amazing actor he is with facial expression. But in the beginning, it's just a very bland, open face. And you think this is someone who's either going to help her or this is just a moment where she's just stopping in a hotel, has a little chat and makes her decisions. As a first-time viewer back in 1960, I'm not entirely sure an audience would have pegged him for a murderer.
Absolutely not.
Definitely not.
And the brilliant thing is that once Marion is out of the movie, Norman suddenly becomes, to some degree, our protagonist. As we see him cleaning up the murder, we don't feel it's his fault. We know he's just trying to protect his mother. We're kind of on his side. It comes to that scene in the swamp as the car is sinking, and it stops for a moment, and we have this moment of, oh my God, the car's not going to sink.
Well, it's true. It's something we didn't mention is that we want Marion to get away with her crime. We want her to succeed, and we shouldn't. She's done a horrible thing, and no matter what her reasons for it are, she's doing something that is going to affect her former boss's business, his client's daughter. I mean, this is going to have a lot of snowball effects that we're supposed to not be on her side for. But because they've framed it in such a way and they've let us know what's in her heart and that she does appear to be a very kind person who's just made a mistake, we want her to get away. And unfortunately, even though we've already seen Norman be creepy and do a peeping Tom bit, we still want him to make sure that it's okay. He can protect his mother, who we haven't met at this point. We just know she's an insane killer.
There's an interesting theme in some movies that the idea of a person is interpreted by those around them and possibly not accurately. We see it a little bit in Inception with the Marion Cotillard character, where the version of that we see in the movie isn't the real person. It's one person's perception of them. And in Solaris, for example, and even Vertigo to some degree. And with Norma Bates, we're never totally sure she's the monster Norman makes her out to be. I mean, our only source of information on this is a guy that we know does not really interpret reality accurately.
He is an unreliable narrator, and his perceptions of his mother they're at odds with what we learn about her outside of him. So his father passed away, I believe I'm not sure if it was 5.
He was 5 when the father passed away.
He was 5 when the father passed. Yeah, so he's not quite right after that, we're told. And eventually, we know he's clingy with his mother and that she dotes on him. But then she remarries and the new husband mysteriously passes.
I'm not sure if they ever got married. I think they were just together.
Were they? I thought they had gotten married.
Because the excuse supposedly for when Norman murders him and frames his mother is that she found out he was married.
Okay, so whatever the case, she murders this new man in her life, but we're never told that she's abusive. We've never said she's controlling. We've never heard anything negative against her.
He's very ambiguous about her.
Right. It's very possible that Norman has always been like this and was acting on some Oedipal impulses, and we're not told how Dad dies. Mm-hmm. So I would speculate that he could have even killed his father.
I always like to think that Norman always uses mother as the excuse to why he does what he does. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to face the fact that he is crazy. He doesn't want to face the fact that he's a psycho. But he sees his mother as almost a get out of jail free card. That, like, if he can somehow interpret in his messed up brain that his mother's the reason why he's the way it is, then he could feel less bad about committing the crimes. He disguises his crimes.
Everything we find out about the mother is told to us either from Norman and his play acting as mother, or from the psychologist. And the psychologist admits that he got it from the mother half of Norman's personality. And the psychologist makes a note that the reason why Norma kills Marion is because this idea was that Norma was jealous of this woman being with Norman, supposedly.
And because he was so pathologically jealous of her, he assumed that she was as jealous of him. Therefore, if he felt a strong attraction to any other woman, the mother's side of him would go wild. When he met your sister, he was touched by her, aroused by her. He wanted her. That set off the jealous mother, and mother killed the girl.
So right there, we have an indication that this version of Norma is based on Norman's problems, not necessarily her actual personality. That he is reinterpreting her through his point of view of how people act. Also, there's that interesting comment that Norman makes about, have you ever seen the inside of a mental hospital?
Yes.
In the book, it's a little more clear that he went to a hospital for a little time after his mother's death. But in the movie, without that there, we start to wonder, maybe he was committed as a kid.
Oh, I fully understood that he'd been committed at some point. That speech, he gets so heated about the inside and what it looks like that only a person who has been there in one respect or another would know.
People always call a madhouse someplace, don't they? Put her in someplace.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to sound uncaring.
What do you know about caring? Have you ever seen the inside of one of those places? The laughing and the tears. And the cruel eyes studying you. My mother there?
So, yeah, it really opens up this idea that everything he thinks he knows about his mother has been distorted through his psychosis. And who knows how long that's been going on. As for Perkins, what a brilliant performance. One beautiful moment of acting I got to bring up. The moment after he finishes his little dinner with Marion and he's done spying on her, and he marches out of the motel office and just kind of glares at the house, and you just get the sense of he's going to finally go tell off Mother. And the way he just marches up the stairs, marches up to the inside the house, right up to the stairwell, and just stops. I just love the way he physically acts that sense of, I'm going to do it. I'm going to finally tell her off. I'm going to stand up for myself. No, I can't do it. And then just slinks into the kitchen and just is so dejected in his body language. That is such a brilliantly acted moment.
And there's another detail about Norman that I wanted to discuss. He does not want to eat with her in her bedroom. It's perceived as her bedroom at this point. And I think that comes down to his sexual hangups, because if he's eating with a woman in her room, I mean, you're eating, you're consuming something. It's a very physical, intimate act in a bedroom. So it takes on a sexual overtone. And since so much of his push and pull is about his sexuality with women versus what he perceives his mom would approve of, it would be unseemly to eat in a woman's private bedroom unless they were married or in a relationship.
It's funny, I actually read the script this week in preparation for that, and Stefano pinpoints that exactly.
Oh, really?
That moment where he moves toward it, and he writes that, Norman's been defiant enough of his mother. This is one step too far from him. So
I feel smart all of a sudden.
So yeah, that is exactly what Stefano intended with that particular moment.
So another thing that Marion does when she's made her final decision is that to return the money, she has revealed her true name. In the motel ledger, she's written her name as, what was it?
Mary Samuels?
Mary Samuels. And she reveals to Norman that her name is actually Marion Crane, which he picks up on looking at the ledger, that she's not written her real name. So in his mind, she is a filthy woman. So he's given himself permission to peer into her bathroom because she's already a dirty woman.
Yeah, when he looks into the ledger and sees the alias, that weird little smile like, oh, yep, that figures.
Exactly.
Another really fascinating little moment on Perkins' part. I know he was very worried about typecasting, and it is tough to think of Anthony Perkins now and not think of Norman Bates. I mean, it is the role he'll always be remembered for. He, for years, wouldn't talk about it and kind of stayed away from it until eventually he embraced it and starred in Psycho 2 and 3 and 4. And I'm glad he did because I enjoyed those movies, but I'm glad he was able to make peace with this role because it is just such an incredible part.
It's one of those parts that does not work without Anthony Perkins. And he made a really wise decision to go back to it when they started making the sequels, because the studio could have easily just recasted him and still sold the film as Psycho 2. It wouldn't have been as successful without Perkins. The studio could have easily just said, screw that, we're going to recast. But Perkins coming back just kind of solidified himself as the one and only Norman Bates.
Not just that, but it sets up what happens with horror franchises in the future, where we have characters like Laurie Strode coming back 20 years later, or Sarah Connor coming back later. So it's establishing that you can revisit these iconic characters with their original actors, picking up on the storyline much later to see what the evolution has been.
Having watched that remake again and seeing Vince Vaughn try and do it, you realize just how much Perkins really understands Norman and brings so much to it. Little things like that whole thing with him munching on candy corn was apparently Perkins' idea. And it's beautiful because, again, it paints him as this little kid.
It's also really hard, for Vince Vaughn, because you could do another Norman Bates but make him act differently. Vince Vaughn was doing a straight-up reinterpretation or a remake of Perkins. It wasn't Vince Vaughn doing a Vince Vaughn Norman Bates. He had to try to do Perkins. That's where the ultimate failure was.
Yeah, I'm trying not to talk too much about the remake versus this one, just because I could fill an entire episode about what worked and what didn't work. But I agree. And unfortunately for Vincent Vaughn and most of the cast of the 1998, they had the task of living up to a classic and these portrayals that are so iconic. And that's fairly insurmountable. So as much as I am not a fan of that version of it, I will acknowledge they had a lot working against them.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
One little detail I noticed this time that I've never noticed before is when Norman first appears running out of the house to Janet Leigh as she's honking on the horn, he has an umbrella that he never opens, and he doesn't open it until he gets to the porch of the motel when he doesn't need it, and then just kind of awkwardly, puts it away and sticks it to his side.
It brought his trusty old umbrella.
Yeah, exactly.
Which he says, and I did not even pick up on that. That's fantastic.
And the way he says trusty umbrella, it's like he's acknowledging, I never even really used this. I kind of goofed up. Oops. But it's, again, one of those weird little endearing details about him that's so, it's charmingly awkward instead of creepy awkward.
He has like a politician's smile.
Yes.
Yeah. Something else that occurred to me watching this, I wonder if Hitchcock really identified with Norman in the sense that he has Mother there, this stuffed corpse that he speaks for and kind of moves around, and it almost sounds kind of like the way Hitchcock felt actors were. He called them, cattle, that, no, you move here, you say what you're supposed to, you move here, you just don't get in the way of the camera. That to him, actors were always just sort of tools and props to bring up these fantasies to life, and Mother's kind of become the same thing for Norman.
He would not be pleased with that interpretation, but I love it.
All right, since you mentioned it is essentially a character, let's talk about what I think is possibly the greatest set in film history, the Bates Motel and the Bates Mansion. Oh my God. Like you were saying, it's iconic. You look at that, it instantly brings up all these emotions of dread.
What's great about the Bates Motel and just how perfect it is by first sight is the layout is so perfectly represented. For a film that is only an hour and 49 minutes, and really the Bates Motel doesn't come in for like 50 minutes of it, 45 to 50 minutes, you understand the layout so perfectly. And just the nooks and crannies of the motel, of the staircase up to the house, of the house, it's just perfectly represented.
One of the things I love about the set design on this is that the house is looming above the motel. So it's ever present, even though we don't spend very much time inside, especially in the first section of our visit to the motel. But it is ever present. It's dark. It's looming over something that is supposed to be a safe little hideaway for Marion. And also, it's at an angle. It is angled so that the windows are facing. It's always watching. The house is always watching the motel.
And to that effect, I think the motel and the house in combination are kind of a visual representation of Norman Bates right there. You have the motel, which is sort of represents his normal self and his public place. It's clean, attractive. It's not very exciting. It's a little bit more modern. And it's kind of Norman's interaction with the outside world. And as the film goes on, when we see behind that motel, we see there's all sorts of junk that's hidden from public view, like a rundown old car, all sorts of just garbage there. And then, like you said, you have the house looming over it, like Mother looming over Norman's shoulder. And that one window, almost like an eye that's constantly looking at him.
Well, to the point that we have Norman's mother in the window watching. So it's a little, on the nose, but it's great.
It's fantastic. I guess the house takes some inspiration from that famous Edward Hopper painting, The House by the Railroad. And if you look at it, it actually is pretty close. But the house, this iconic house, is actually taken from a lot of other set pieces from other movies. That top tower, you can see it from The House from Harvey if you look closely in that one. And I noticed that interior stairwell that Arbogast is killed on, if you watch the original Cape Fear, it pops up in there in a key scene too. So it's almost like this weird Frankenstein amalgamation, but it became so famous that now this is it. It is this configuration.
Also, one of the things that makes the filming of this location so successful is that we are only focusing on 2 rooms in the motel. Room 1, specifically just a living area and a bathroom, and then the office. So we don't have to grapple with the rest of the hotel. It's there for effect. There are, 12 rooms?
12 cabins.
12 cabins.
We see the inside of one more, but it's essentially the same as one, so.
But we are focusing on 1 in the office, so it's very intimate that way, and the house. So room 1 and the office are sandwiched between these 2 just spaces that are nebulous to us at that point.
It is more realistic just to show the office in the room, because as everyday people, that's all we see. We see the office we go into to get the key, and the room. The rest of the motel, to us, is a mystery, and I mean, it's a small detail, but those small details go far.
And a lot of the little things about that walkway up there, there's like a table that you can kind of see outside, out in front of the house, and suddenly you have this backstory of imagining Norman and his mother sitting at that table on some nice summer day. All that junk behind the motel I mentioned, you have this broken down car that maybe Mother drove that, maybe that belonged to the boyfriend who was murdered. All these little things that suggest the history of the Bates family.
Or the number of women he'd murdered before that. I cannot imagine that Marion was the first.
Where it's hinted at that there are at least 2 other ones.
Right.
So, yeah. I've always wanted to go to Universal to California and see this house. I know it's not in its original position anymore. They've moved it since then. And in fact, now it's right next to fucking Whoville and the crashed plane from War of the Worlds. But I still want to go see it.
I've never been, but there is a cool thing to do on Halloween Horror Nights, where they put Norman Bates out in front and they light it up with this like blue light to make it look black and white from the outside.
That's awesome.
It is amazing. It's so cool.
I've seen images from like the tours where as you're going by, you see him dumping Marion into the car, and then he actually like goes inside, comes out as Norma, and like chases after the tram. I think that'd be incredible.
That's amazing.
But even before I saw this movie, I grew up with seeing this house in like other shows. Like I think I remember Different Strokes did their Universal Studios episode, and they visited that house.
I've actually seen that.
So something that we didn't talk about, but I want to bring up because it's very important when it comes to when we get to the motel. Marion passes through a veil, and we've talked about this veil of rain in our episode on Suspiria, but it brings you from a place of reality to a place where the fantastic is about to occur. And even though this fantastic occurrence is still, based in reality, we don't have witches or stuff like that. It is a kind of fantastic situation. So we've passed through her heist, because it's basically a heist and a getaway at this point, into mystery. So passing through that veil of rain is just a symbol for the audience, not just of her state of mind, but it's a signal that you are entering a different phase.
It also serves as foreshadowing for the shower.
Right.
And I've often wondered the weird, crazy vertical and horizontal lines of the opening credits, if that's supposed to represent the rain and the water from the shower.
I actually always interpreted that as slashing.
All right, that works too.
Yeah, I mean...
yeah, that's exactly what I thought.
So let's talk about the shower scene, because, I mean, if there's one big takeaway from this movie, it is this scene.
People have written books and documentaries on this one scene. So, yeah, it's incredibly important.
It's one of the most important scenes in movie history. Top 5, at least.
I know we've mentioned it before, but this was pretty much the first time a bathroom had been shown so extensively. It's featured. And in fact, it's so important. It is the one scene everybody knows. Even if you've never seen the film, everybody knows about the shower scene. The idea of that much female nudity and that much female vulnerability in a space that's lit so harshly. I mean, this is what I mean when I say that it's naked. It's not sexualized at all. This is a blatant, bloody murder.
One of the creepiest scenes in the film is when Norman is just looking through the peephole, watching Marion undress, and there's it's just quiet other than the shower running. And it's just something really eerie about just the uncomfortableness of him watching her as a spectator.
Yeah, and the idea of this being so transgressive is actually shown in the way she approaches the shower. Because yes, she is getting undressed. She's in a partial state of undress, but then she puts a robe on for modesty. So even within her private area, she is very modest. She is a good woman. We're supposed to read her as a good woman.
It's funny. I almost looked at that as she has to put a robe on to do her calculations because this is part of her coming back to honesty. She still has work to do first. And then once she's done that, then she can take it off. Then
but
take
it's
the
a
shower.
modesty.
Yeah. There's that famous speech that Hitchcock has made about the nature of shock and suspense. Shock is, for example, a bomb blowing up under a table while two people are just sitting there talking. Suspense is showing the bomb before it goes off so the audience has the information about it and is these guys have got to get out of there. There's a bomb there. And this film illustrates both in that amazing shot where we see Marion in the foreground, we see the shower curtain, and through it, we see the figure coming into the room. So we know there's somebody else there and she doesn't, and we're just waiting for her to become aware of this. And yet still, Hitchcock also gets the shock of it as well. Once that curtain is ripped open and the stabbing starts, it's just an amazing kind of 1-2 punch.
I did want to back up just a second to talk about the shower itself, the idea of water, because I know this is something that we discussed before recording. We have water again, and you talked about it being a foreshadowed event from the rain, which I agree. And as the rain is passing into a different phase of the movie, the shower is as well. And she has so much joy in that shower. You can see she's having a great time. She's made a decision to come back to purity. This is a purification wash. She's literally washing herself of sin so that she can go back and return the money and remain a good person. So that she is attacked while she is trying to regain her goodness in her own mind is potent.
It almost goes to the slasher movie thing of, the transgression. Well, now they have to pay. She transgresses and is about to redeem herself and just never gets that chance. Now, in terms of the actual structure of the scene, the editing is so amazing. That whole thing of, you feel like you're seeing her get stabbed when you're really not. There are a couple shots, the way they're framed and cut together, it really does feel like she's getting stabbed. There's one where Marion turns and Norman slashes at her back. And I swear every time I see it, I feel like I can feel that hit.
It's visceral. Very intense. Especially the black and white makes it a little more harder to follow.
And that many fast edits. I mean, this was before quick editing was really as common in motion pictures. And to have that many edits and quick shots in so short a time, it's like the editing is actually assaulting the audience as well.
That alone is intense for a 1960 audience.
Obviously, they shot in black and white, one of the solutions around blood, which is something, filmmakers do now to a degree to stop themselves from getting an NC-17 rating. But another function of the drain is to show that spiral, to show the blood going down in a spiral, which is something that we've seen several times by that point with her calculations that have been flushed into the toilet. So there is that swirling. So it brings those two. It's unsavory. The blood going down the drain, it's starting to hide something. Her calculations going down the toilet seems as if she's hiding something, but it's also dirty. These are both considered very dirty things. Anything that goes down the toilet, anything that goes down the drain, these are gross things. But we also get it on her eyeball. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember if it is reversed, if it's counterclockwise versus clockwise or clockwise versus counterclockwise on her eye.
I feel like clockwise,
okay.
or counterclockwise, I should say.
In any case, it's not showing us that she's dirty, but that this violence upon her, it's just vile. It's just reinforcing the depravity.
It's funny because that long pullback from her eye, I've always wondered if that was Hitchcock having a little fun with the audience, doing this long shot, waiting to see if the audience was going to think that she's going to blink and get up and that she's injured, but she's not dead. Just messing with them to make them think, oh, you think she's going to get up? Nope, she's definitely dead. Because I've heard of a lot of audience members who just were not convinced. They kept thinking, oh, there's got to be some other way that she's still alive. She can't actually be dead. They just couldn't accept it.
She's framed as the main character. How can you kill off the main character?
You can't just kill a main character like that. Who do you think you are?
And she's the star, essentially. She's the big name in this film. Before this, most of these actors hadn't really been seen in that much and weren't really that recognizable. Janet Leigh is the big name. We're also talking about, in terms of the calculations that she makes, that she flushes, why she flushes them and doesn't just toss them down the toilet.
It irritates me
or toss them in the trash.
So much, because she's already made this decision. She is going to give the money back. These calculations are just how can she pay back that money? What does she owe situation? How much is left? And she rips the paper up. She almost puts it in the trash, and then she decides instead to put it in the toilet. The difference there for me is there's evidence in the trash, whereas in the toilet, she's able to hide this sin. So even though she has made the decision to go back and return the money and account for what she's done, she still sees it as dirty.
I saw it another way. I think it's symbolism of what's going to happen to the money. The money is going into the swamp with her body. And so if this little piece of paper symbolizes the money, it's like, nope, it's just going down there.
That's great.
It's crap. It doesn't matter. It is not important to the plot.
See, I had like a very overdramatic look at it with her counting the money still kind of is her trying to humanize herself. Like, I'm not a monster. See, I even calculate how much I still, like you sink her in, back. It's basically just her kind of trying to rationalize it in her brain about her seeing herself as a criminal. Mm-hmm. But I like yours more idea.
Now, originally, Hitchcock was not going to have any music with the shower scene. And if you look on a lot of the DVDs, they actually have the shower scene presented without any music so you can see what it would have been like. And it's eerie, but man, that Bernard Herrmann score gives it so much more power. I wonder if this scene would have been as effective without that music.
I don't think so.
I don't think as effective. Silence is used very, very well in this film, and that's just not the moment for it. Because even though there is this horrible naked stabbing, the sound, those slashing strings, it makes it more violent.
I also, in a way, think the score makes the violence more, and this is going to sound weird, so bear with me, like crowd-pleasing in a way. In the same way, if that's what incites the people to scream, to get, like, loud, is because the score is so loud, and it's so shocking, and it's so abrupt. It kind of adds to the intensity of the act itself.
I also wonder if, maybe on the same level, it takes away from the reality in a good way. I mean, if without the score, it would just be this naked woman being stabbed in a shower, and it's grim and horrific. With the score, exactly. Like you said, it makes it a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more of a part of the movie.
So pulling it back from the thought that this is a reality and bringing it back to the idea, no, guys, this is a fiction, even though it's horrible. Listen to the music. This is not really happening.
Yeah, stylizes it a little bit enough to make it palatable. A couple interesting details on it. An oversized shower head was designed for that head-on shot of the water streaking past the camera. It was the only way they could get water shooting toward the camera without actually getting on the camera. So it's a lot bigger than it actually would seem to be. And when they cut back to that shower head after that amazing pullback of Janet Leigh on the floor, it was necessary because during editing they realized that Janet Leigh accidentally took one more breath when she's lying there still. So that's why we have that awkward cut to the shower again and then cut back to her and then we move out of the room.
It's weird. I actually like that cut.
Yeah.
For some reason. I think it really adds to the horror.
And how much of it is that's just how we know it and how much of it is that it is a great edit?
It gives it almost a finality. It's almost like once we have that cut, it's like, okay, that's it. It's done. And we know she's dead. And now we're going to move on with the plot. Saul Bass, Hitchcock's regular title designer and a storyboard artist, actually tried to take credit for directing the scene, but his account has been heavily, heavily disputed. I mean, he drew some storyboards for the scene and for some of the other set pieces of the film, but Hitchcock was on set every day for it. And Janet Leigh has a funny story about how, while filming the scene, they had this little sort of moleskin piece for her to wear so she wasn't entirely naked. But the problem was, once she went under the shower water, it started to peel off. And she had filmed that shot of her hanging over the side still so many times and always kept moving. And she finally got it right, and she could feel the piece starting to peel off. And she's like, I'm not moving. So she just basically felt, if the crew gets a look, they get a look, whatever.
It's also important to note that Hitchcock did provide a body double for her.
He did. I'm not sure how much of her is in the movie. I know she's the one that Norman actually carries in the shower curtain to the car. I'm not sure if she's the one in the overhead shot where we see her actually fall over the side of the tub. Upon seeing the completed film, Leigh was so shocked at how effective the scene was, she stopped taking showers for years. Isn't it weird to imagine you can be part of that scene and it never really occurs to you just what it is and how it's working until you actually see it cut together?
Well, this idea that a lot of actors don't even know what they're filming until they see the finished product. So it makes sense that she wouldn't understand just how affecting that would be until it was complete.
Yeah, I guess if you're just filming a piece of you scream here, okay, you move right, and you move here, and you scream here, it doesn't feel the same as if you see it flowing together cut, yeah. All right, so let's talk about the score itself by regular Hitchcock collaborator Bernard Herrmann. How many scores, you just need to cite one note, and you know exactly what the score is. With this, it's just that high screech, and everybody knows it.
I mean, there were like really terrible children movies that I would watch as a kid. I can't name any off the top of my head. Looney Tunes did this once, but they used the score in the movie, and even my 6-year-old brain could pick up what it was from. That's recognizable.
There are lots of scores where a couple, maybe 2 notes, Jaws, I'm thinking, for instance. With the first one, I think I could figure it out, but it wouldn't be a certainty until that second note. I can't think of one other instance where I'd recognize from one note.
And you hear somebody doing that, you know exactly what it is and exactly what it means.
Only one I could think of is Star Wars with the immediate, like, big boom.
Right. That's right. That first blast of brass.
Apparently, Hitchcock had envisioned a jazz score for the film, but Herrmann hit upon this amazing idea of doing the score with only strings, because he felt that was the best way to sonically represent a black and white movie. So it's literally all strings. No percussion, no horns, nothing. Just strings. And it's funny, it never occurred to me until I heard that, and then you think back, then yeah, that's all it is.
It makes it, this is going to sound like a pun, but I'm not trying to be punny here. This sounds sharper. It cuts through the film deeper.
It does.
That it's not smoothing.
Strings are a strident, or they can be strident, and I think that's how it's composed. Very taut sound.
There's not a lot of room for warmth in the score. I don't think there's very much music that's pretty or soft or comforting. It's all very on edge and creepy.
One of the things I really love about Herrmann's score is that he knows when to pull back. There is an entire scene where there is just silence. From the moment Marion drives up to the motel until Norman leaves room 1, there is no music at all. There's just all of this empty space where we can feel the atmosphere of the motel. We can feel the gravity of the situation, and almost she feels she's safe because she's just come out of a situation where she can't see and she's being chased by the police. So this is a rest moment, but it's also very eerie.
Actually, I think one of the most terrifying parts of the shower scene is when it's silent after the murder, when it spirals into the drain, out of Marion's eye, and it's just quiet except for the faucet running. That's terrifying to me.
Yeah.
One thing that struck me I thought was interesting is that kind of lower, quiet, menacing motif that Herrmann employs in the film, that seems to be more connected to the money. It comes up when we see the money on the bed, when she's sorting through the money at the salesman's place, when she's arranging the money at the motel, when she's trying to figure out where she's going to hide it. That's when that music comes in. It's like this really eerie theme, and it's always tied to this money. And I'm not sure if it comes back again once she ends up in the swamp. Going back to Star Wars, John Williams actually kind of paid homage to Herrmann's score by, there's this 3-note motif that comes up when he's putting the car into the swamp, that Williams uses note for note in Star Wars when everyone's hiding in the Millennium Falcon's little storage things. And as the stormtroopers leave the Falcon, they all pop out. You can hear those 3 notes. And Williams put it in there on purpose as a little nod.
Oh,
to
yeah.
Herrmann.
Yeah, I hear that.
Now I can't watch that movie and not hear those 3 notes and go, ow! Moving on to some of the other characters, let's talk about Lila Crane. Lila's interesting because she doesn't entirely feel like the protagonist, but she is kind of the motivating force for the last half of the movie. Without her, it doesn't really feel like the plot would be moving. She's the one who's constantly trying to push to, hey, let's investigate that motel.
Well, you want me to drop you at the hotel, or...?
Sam, I still won't feel satisfied until I go out there.
Neither will I. Come on.
We better decide what we're going to say or do when we walk in there.
We're going to register as man and wife. We're going to get shown to a cabin. And then we're going to search every inch of the place, inside and out.
She's really the driving force for the rest of the film.
Oh, she's basically the one that her persistence, the reason why Normandy gets investigated in the first place.
I think after Marion and Norman, we don't get much in the way of character development or even character story. We have Marion's sister, and we have Marion's lover, and we have the detective, but they're more of I don't want to go as far as to say cardboard, because they're not, but they are just stand-ins to get the story told.
They're pieces on the chessboard, yeah.
They're simple characters to progress Norman and Marion's story.
Yeah, they're ciphers in a way.
Yeah. Lila's, I think, the one that comes the closest to being a little bit more of a full character with her concerns.
Yeah, 100%.
It's interesting that you'd think in a conventional movie we would have had a scene with her early in the film to establish her before she shows up midway through. I kind of love that, no, we have a couple vague references to her that Marion makes, but we actually don't meet her until Marion is gone. I love how many times this movie just kind of goes over what a conventional movie would do and throws it out the window.
Well, because I really think what Psycho does so well at Hitchcock, he doesn't focus on anything that you don't need to. There are parts of the film, especially the first 40 minutes, where all you need to know is Marion's decision to steal the money for Sam and her getting the base motel. Anything that happens between that is just means to the end. To water it down with other characters would just kind of ruin it, in my opinion.
I agree with that, but I'd like to build on it a little bit and say that introducing Lila earlier would have been a complication, because it would give us the possibility that someone would be looking for Marion, and that Marion might not be the full protagonist of the story, that there are possible other characters that will come into the film. So it would ruin the surprise.
Miles had previously worked with Hitchcock when she started as Rose Balistrero in The Wrong Man, his true crime story with Henry Fonda, and he had been grooming her to be his next leading lady until she went and got pregnant, and basically she's only in this one to fulfill her contract with Hitchcock. He kind of dropped her after that.
How dare she?
I know. And notably, and the more I watch, the more I notice that she's very clearly wearing a wig for her entire role, because she had just actually shaved her head for her role in 5 Branded Women. And most of the time it's fine. Every once in a while you can see that lace front. Especially on Blu-ray.
Exactly. I was going to say, you probably wouldn't have seen it when it was on the original film, but Blu-ray is very crisp and they sharpen things up constantly, so we can probably see it much better now.
Miles would return to play a very different version of Lila Crane in Psycho 2. On the one hand, I feel like it's almost a betrayal of the character, the way she is written in that film. On the other hand, I kind of love it. So let's move on to probably the least interesting element of this entire film, John Gavin as Sam Loomis. God, I hate to say it, he's boring. And I don't think it's entirely John Gavin's part. Sam Loomis is just kind of a boring character.
And a necessarily boring character.
Well, he's really just there as, he's a prize. He is the thing that Marion wants. She wants him. She wants the married, respectable life. He doesn't really matter in the story except for what he symbolizes.
He's point B to her.
Yeah.
She's basically going from point A to Sam.
Right.
And Sam's just a destination. Other than that, he doesn't really matter.
And he feels kind of ineffectual. In the second half of the movie, when Lila shows up and is very worried for where Marion is, he seems content to just kind of hang around and, well, we'll wait for the private investigator. Well, we'll talk to the sheriff. Well, I guess there's not much we can do. She's the one who's like, no, let's go search that motel. Let's go do this.
Well, in a way, you can see that this film is very female-driven. Marion takes the action. She takes the money. And then her sister pursues her. In general, it's the women who are taking the lead here, and that just, it's a misdirect, because we also think that the mother is the killer by this point, so it would be another woman taking action.
Sam's big role is to stop Norman at the very last scene of the movie. That's kind of the most he accomplishes in this entire movie. That's about it. And like that scene where he's needling Norman, thinking that he's getting under his skin, that he's going to find out what happened to Marion and this money. It just feels so ridiculous. Like he's playing this hard-boiled character all of a sudden out of nowhere. And it's like, dude, you're not good at this.
You look frightened. Have I been saying something frightening?
I don't know what you've been saying.
I've been talking about your mother, about your motel. How are you going to do it?
Do what?
Buy a new one? In a new town where you won't have to hide your mother?
Why don't you just get in your car and drive away from here, okay?
Where will you get the money to do that, Bates? Or do you already have it, socked away?
Shut up!
A lot of it. $40,000. I bet your mother knows where the money is and what you did to get it. I think she'll tell us.
There's no difference from that scene with Sam trying to get him to talk. It's no different than in like an 80s slasher. I'm like the jock to yell at the killer, like, "Oh, you think you're tough?"
Exactly.
It's basically like no difference. It's just this one's a little more talk based.
And this sort of ineffectual male ego thing, it's echoed in the film Future. I think taking from how ineffectual Loomis is, we have characters like the Chris Hemsworth character from Cabin in the Woods, where you think, oh, he's going to save the day. And nope, no, he is not.
As for Gavin himself, he almost played James Bond in Diamonds Are Forever until United Artists decided to pay Connery a ridiculous amount of money for it. And he later became the U.S. ambassador to Mexico under Reagan. Apparently,
really?
Yeah, Hitchcock wasn't really thrilled with casting him. He was kind of pushed onto the production because everyone thought he was going to be the next big thing, but Hitchcock felt he was kind of stiff and boring.
You can even tell that in the direction of Sam. Yeah, you go over there and you talk. You talk to Perkins.
Yeah, be topless. There you go.
Dude, just be handsome. That's why I'm paying you.
Like, one of the only times he actually put something into one of his lines is something that makes me hate him more. The ending during the psychologist's explanation was like, why was he dressed like that? He's just so horrified at that. That's about the only thing he kind of brings to it beyond just being very bland. The lasting legacy he has, though, is that his name was borrowed by John Carpenter for Donald Pleasance in the Halloween movies. So we have that at least. Now, on the other hand, we have Martin Balsam as Arbogast. I love that this guy is kind of a misdirect, too, because he shows up in the movie, and he's fucking Martin Balsam, and he's awesome. So you think, oh, here's our new hero. This is the guy who's going to put it all together and solve the murder. He comes in like a, a film noir PI. He knows what's going on. He's Mr. Cool. When we watch him during that interrogation of Norman, compare him to Sam, where Sam's just like through brute force, like, how about it, huh? What are you going to do, huh? And Arbogast is very sly and cool and tricking Norman into making little slip-ups and then being like, oh, no, I totally understand. Of course, everyone make that mistake.
Tell me all about her.
Well, she arrived rather late one night, and she went straight to sleep and left early the next morning.
Well, how early?
Oh, very early.
Mm-hmm. Which morning was that?
The next morning, Sunday.
I see. Mm-hmm. Did anyone meet her here?
No.
Did she arrive with anyone?
No.
Uh-huh. Did she make any phone calls or?
No.
Locally? Did you spend the night with her?
No.
Well, then, how would you know that she didn't make any phone calls?
And just drawing out information from him very subtly. And then just when you think, oh, this is the guy who's going to put it all together, nope, boom, he's gone too.
I mean, the name Arbogast itself, like, it straight up sounds like a parody of a classic detective, like a noir novel.
Arbogast, P.I. Yeah, you could almost imagine
exactly.
flipping the badge out.
Oh yeah, this Arbogast is a man I could trust.
There's something that's, in a weird paradox, very mundane about Balsam that makes him much more interesting. I can't quite explain it. I don't know what it is. But he's always just a really solid actor. I always love him. Arbogast's murder, I adore the staging of that. It's different from the book where he's just kind of killed in the foyer of the house, but to put it on the stairs where he is even more vulnerable, and just that shot of Balsam flailing his arms, trying to get purchase on the stairs, moving backward. Everybody, I think, can relate to that idea of falling down the stairs or trying to not fall down the stairs at some point and trying to keep your balance. To put a guy being slashed at while that's happening, such a way to put the audience ill at ease.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. It was filmed in a very interesting way. It was a composite shot.
It's
right?
projection shot.
Projection shot, thank
Yeah.
you.
They had a camera sliding down the banister, and then they developed that, put it on a projection screen, had Balsam sitting on a chair in front of it, just flailing his arms.
Which really adds to the moment of panic. It's not a real moment. It feels a little bit like frenzy. We've just had a moment where we've seen a possible woman come slashing at this person who we think is going to solve the crime. So it's just another moment of, guys, this isn't real. It's going to look crazy. Here you go. It's another way for Hitchcock to stylize the murder.
And how startling it must have been, that moment where the gash just opens up in his face as a makeup effect. That's something you didn't really see very often in this kind of movie then. That's pretty shocking for its day. Getting into some of the wider themes of the movie, I feel like a lot of Hitchcock's films present this sort of potential for violence and evil in the normal day-to-day world. We see that in a lot of his movies. A great example is Shadow of a Doubt, this like beautiful, idyllic hometown that happens to have a psychotic killer visiting it. And I think that's a big part of it here, not just with this idea of this rundown motel that conceals horrific secrets and that Norman looks normal, but he's actually this killer, but a theme that was a lot stronger in the book of this idea of normal people making decisions that spin them into a life of crime. There's a lot in the book about Sam talking about the history of the town, about, oh, this old guy who did this horrible thing all of a sudden, and this family man who seemed normal and did this. And we see it, of course, with Marion, this idea that she's a very normal secretary and office assistant who one day kind of loses it and makes this terrible, impulsive decision that completely destroys her life.
It's capitalizing on the suspicions of people that anyone lurking around the corner, this regular looking person, could have a deep, dark secret. And that sort of paranoia was still rampant in the 60s.
There was still that lingering, communism thing
exactly.
floating around. Yeah.
So you never know behind closed doors who's doing what.
It's the whole idea of peeking into your neighbor and saying, what are they really doing in there?
Exactly.
It's like that Tom Waits song, "What's He Building in There?" Like, no, that's
love that
kind
song.
of like the whole idea. Yeah, it's basically, that's like Hitchcock's whole, that's the themes in most of his films. So I think in Psycho is that idea of like anybody could be Norman Bates, but it's the deeper psychology in Norman Bates that makes it interesting.
It's almost as if Hitchcock wants us to all realize that we are the horror in the world. We are the villains.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't go into supernatural very often.
I don't know if he's ever actually gone into supernatural. I mean, the birds might be
I'd
the
say
only...
birds.
Possibly. Even there could be a natural explanation that we're just
Possibly.
missing. So many of his movies are a very average, everyday person who's thrown into a crazy situation. And this one seems to imply this idea that the average, everyday person can cause the crazy situation. There's also this theme of romance foiled. I think we talked about this a little bit. So many Hitchcock movies have these romantic subplots forged in these strange and terrifying circumstances. Characters who are on the run who end up kind of romantically linked. And here, the primary romantic relationships, Marion and Sam, is destroyed by Marion's murder, reached through the circumstance of her doing something illegal and rash to fulfill that relationship. And as you mentioned, we see early on that she's surrounded by people who are either married or getting married. Her office mate keeps talking about how, she took tranquilizer during her marriage, and her mother called to ask about how Teddy is doing and all that.
And he didn't flirt with her because he must have seen her ring.
You mentioned Tom Cassidy's daughter getting married as well, rubbing the salt in the wound for Marion. And as he comments during the dinner that Norman is kind of trapped in a similar situation. He can't really interact with people much. He can't develop a romantic relationship, at least with somebody he's not related to. So there's almost this weird sense that in a twisted way, Marion and Norman are kind of perfect for each other.
Ew.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think Hitchcock also wants to show that through Marion's crime, he doesn't want to Hollywoodize it. He doesn't want to make it seem like this is almost like a dramatic gesture of love. Like, her driving is the most anxious parts of the film.
Mm-hmm.
Her, like, the hearing what could possibly happen if she gets caught or stuff like that. It's very unromantic. And if anything, it makes it seem like how not to have a romance. So I think he's almost like deconstructing it and then ending it really properly with the murder, obviously.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of film noirs where there's a heist or something involving money where it is kind of romanticized. I mean, it almost always goes wrong in those, but still there's that. And this crime is so kind of bland and mundane and unromantic.
The crime is also very spiteful. The person it's going to affect is that 18-year-old who is going to get married. So she is possibly ruining this woman's wedding.
Oh, he can afford more.
But
Says.
I mean, he said he could, but how much of that was him trying to get in her pants?
Well, that's the thing. I almost feel like the crime, if there's another motive, is a little spite toward Cassidy himself. And we see that when she's driving and hearing Cassidy complain about, you saw her, she practically flirted with me. It's one of the only times we see Marion smile. Just this tiny little smile of satisfaction. It's like the only joy she's getting out of this is that idea of that she's made this guy really angry and upset.
Yeah, I agree.
Of course, there's a very strong bird theme going out throughout the movie, visually and otherwise. Norman's birds in his parlor, of course. Marion Crane's name. Norman notes that Marion eats like a bird. Lots of photos of birds on the wall. I noticed there was even a bird on the china that Norman serves her sandwich with.
Yes, but after Norman finds, quote unquote, finds her body, he knocks over a picture of a bird. It's a fallen bird. It's murdered just as if she has been murdered.
I never noticed before the really creepy thing that when he's talking to her in the parlor, he reaches back to pat one of his stuffed birds. And I always took that as sort of it's a comforting thing for him, like it's one of his buddies. And then I noticed that as he's petting this bird, his other hand is petting his leg, which I thought it's really a weird, creepy detail that Perkins threw in there. Almost like
It's surreal.
If this stuffed bird on the mantelpiece that he's petting is sort of a stand-in for Mother, that he's almost kind of pleasuring himself at the same time.
Or even any woman.
Yeah, it's really creepy.
Plus, he's doing it while he's looking at Marion, so he is establishing to the audience that he is a voyeur.
Marion, who's a pretty girl, who in England might be called a bird.
Right.
Even down to the famous screeches of the soundtrack, during the murder, it almost sounds like a bird screech. And in fact, Herman would specialize in that for when he's doing all the sound effects for the birds in the next film.
It still shocks me that the birds came out after Psycho.
How so?
Because it feels like modern theater movies basically have conditioned me for things to be homages. So I see this, I'm like, that's an homage to the birds. And I'm like, oh, wait, 1 second.
Maybe it's Alfred already thinking ahead.
Well, it's very possible that birds are a symbol throughout his work. I haven't studied his work enough to know that, but
That'd be
it's worth
interesting to
looking
look at, though.
Exactly, it's worth looking into.
Interesting.
Plus, the birds that are on either side of Norman while he's sitting in the back office with Marion, they're birds of prey. So the birds of prey are hovering over him. He is the predator. Not that predator, but he's a predator.
Another visual motif running through the film, reflections, of course. Reflections come up a whole bunch of times. And I noticed this time a lot of them seem to be focused on Marion. That there's a mirror in the cheap motel that she's dressing herself in when she's talking to Sam. Although, notably, we never actually see her fully in the mirror. We just see like a little bit. We do see her when she's in the bedroom packing when she's resolved to take the money. We see her when she's looking at herself in the mirror when she's counting up money at the car dealership. You pointed out, and I totally missed this, that there's a mirror in the motel as she's checking in that only spotlights her right next to her. And there's a reflection of her and Norman in the motel window when he brings her dinner. What struck me as interesting is that in the bathroom where you'd expect we might get a mirror shot, we don't. And it's after she's decided that she's going to go back and pay back the money. It's like these mirrors are suggesting these two sides of Marion, the dark side and the light side, this duality. And now that that's resolved, that she's going to pay it back, that she's not going to be a criminal, the reflection is gone. We don't see it again.
I wish I had more to add to that, but I don't.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't even consider the mirror thing.
When Lila goes to Norma's room and is looking around, she's startled by a reflection of herself in the mirror behind her and the mirror in front of her, which made me wonder if, unlike Marion, she's afraid of this dark side of herself, and therefore she wouldn't have made the choice that Marion does. Unlike Marion, who can look in the mirror, look at this other side of herself and go like, all right, yeah, I'm going to commit this crime. Lila, she's too good. The idea of that just terrifies her. And of course, there's the theme of mothers. We get numerous mentions of mothers before we meet Norma. Marion mentions that Sam will have dinner at the house respectably with Mother's picture on the mantle watching them, which is a nice little hint already about this idea of a mother figure that's keeping an eye on a romance.
A mother figure who may not be alive, who is looming above them, because the photo of the mother would be on the mantle, which is probably much higher than the table.
And then Caroline at the office chats about her mother, and it sounds like her mother is also pushing her way into her affairs and keeping tabs on her. Okay, here's a question for you. What do you guys think of the psychologist wrap-up scene at the end? I know it gets a lot of stick. I'm curious as to what you guys think.
It takes me out of the movie.
Yeah, it feels obligatory.
One of my least favorite things that movies do is have exposition after the conclusion. I hate epilogues in movies.
Yeah, it actually happened a lot in 50s sci-fi.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Quite a bit. So I feel like that was a throwback, but also sloppy.
The thing is, I think we look at it from this point of view of we know Psycho and we know what happened. If an audience was coming to this for the first time, I think they kind of need it because there's a lot of red herrings that otherwise don't make a lot of sense. This whole thing about Norma being buried in Green Lawn Cemetery these past 10 years, you kind of need to explain that, I think. And this idea that a lot of people aren't really going to be aware of this idea of dissociative identity disorder. Yes, The Three Faces of Eve had come out, but it wasn't really, I think, quite in the public consciousness as much as it is now.
It was still taboo to talk about, I mean, mental health might be the wrong way to put it, but it was still taboo to talk about mental illnesses. Basically, they would just throw them in, like, asylums and institutions and keep them there. They weren't something that we talked about, like, how do we fix these people? These weren't people that were out in the open that we were discussing through science how to work with them.
A more sophisticated script would have handled a lot of this information in the film itself. I do feel like that last little bit, the explanation, feels tacked on. But for the time, I'm not sure how they could have woven that in. The audiences were not sophisticated enough to get that. So for that audience, it would make sense that they'd have to have some kind of blanket explanation, but it doesn't work for me.
It only doesn't work in hindsight.
Right.
Yeah, because I think the audience at the time would have assumed, okay, then this means Norman's been pretending that his mother's alive the whole time. I don't know if they would have accepted that Norman thinks he's his mother. And I do think they needed that explained to some degree. Also, I love Simon Oakland. He played the really grumpy editor on The Night Stalker for years, so it's kind of neat getting to see him play this kind of part. Although it made me wonder, is like acting and stand-up performance sort of a requirement for psychologists? Because he's not just explaining, he is like really performing the hell out of this monologue.
He was simply doing everything possible to keep alive the illusion of his mother being alive. And when reality came too close, when danger or desire threatened that illusion, he'd dress up, even to a cheap wig he bought. He'd walk about the house, sit in her chair, speak in her voice. He tried to be his mother. And now he is.
It is a little out there, but I kind of like it.
It's his moment.
It is his moment. And it is interesting to hear the scene was controversial at the time for inclusion of the word transvestite. Now, I know that is not a preferred term at this point, but I do think it's interesting that the psychologist is making a clear distinction between that word and what Norman is doing, and making clear that what this psychotic killer is doing is not that.
Why was he dressed like that?
He's a transvestite.
Not exactly. A man who dresses in women's clothing in order to achieve a sexual change or satisfaction is a transvestite. But in Norman's case, he was simply doing everything possible to keep alive the illusion of his mother being alive.
It kind of reminds me of that throwaway line, and probably something could have emphasized better in Silence of the Lambs, where they're trying to emphasize that Buffalo Bill is not transgender. He's something else.
That does not make him evil, basically.
Yeah.
They're separating that side from his actual horrible side. And I think that's very sophisticated and very progressive for the time.
It's unfortunate that coming out of a psychologist, it still makes it sound like it's a mental disorder, but...
At the time,
Yes.
I believe it was still
I think it still was.
The DSM. Fairly certain.
I'm pretty sure you're right, yeah.
So for a psychologist
Yep.
to say it at the time made total sense. I will not even claim to know enough about the ins and outs of the language to really speak on how I would categorize what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I would be interested to hear what other people have to say on this topic, people who know a lot more about it than I do.
Yeah, it's definitely a rather uncomfortable gray area there, but it's one of these things that kind of makes me uncomfortable in retrospect, that Norman isn't gay, he's not transgender, yet it does kind of go in with Hitchcock's tendency to villainize gay characters. So many of his movies have villains who are either gay or coded as gay that it unfortunately does kind of fall into that a little bit.
Would you say that it's an otherness and that Hitchcock has either picked scripts, or I'm not sure how many of them he actually wrote. I am embarrassed by my lack of Hitchcockian knowledge, but it could be he perceives this as the other, and that other can be evil. I know that to pick up on something very contemporary, J.K. Rowling has a bad habit of choosing groups of people in her works that are othered, and those othered people are always evil or gross in some way or another. And it's possible that that's what Hitchcock is doing. It's not a good thing.
No.
But I'm trying to figure out how he could justify having characters who are coded as gay as being bad. I mean, it could literally just be that he's homophobic.
That's kind of the vibe I got with some of them. Certainly, you look at Rebecca, it's in that one. North by Northwest with Martin Landau's character, who almost out and out says it. And the Robert Walker character in Strangers on a Train really reads that way watching it now. I don't know if it's also just part of the time that they just tended to do that. If a gay character's in a movie, they have to be a villain, and even then, usually it wouldn't be overt, just sort of hinted at in there. But it's a real bummer. And watching this in that respect, I know Norman doesn't qualify, but I could feel that vibe of it. And
so he would not have a nuanced vision of the differences between homosexuality, transvestitism, and DID.
It's playing on that idea of if an audience sees a man in a dress, they're going to get creeped out. That kind of thing, unfortunately, no matter what the explanation is.
Unfortunate, but it was just for the time.
Yeah.
Per course of the time.
So there's something really interesting about the way Hitchcock uses color for Marion specifically. The first time we see Marion, she is partially unclothed, which was scandalous, hugely scandalous, but her undergarments are all white. There is purity. They are telling us right away through color that this is a good girl, even though she's partially naked with a man she's not married to in bed. She's still a good girl. When she's decided to steal the money, she has the money in hand, she's packing it home, her undergarments are now black and everything she's wearing is much darker. It's a dark car that she makes her getaway in, so it's coded as evil. She's doing an evil thing and she's now evil, and when she changes it for a later car, it's a disguise. She's trying to show, I'm pure, don't come after me, I'm fine. So at this point, she's just hiding what she's changed into in the color scheme of things.
That's interesting. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, and when she makes the decision to return the money all of a sudden in the hotel, she actually changes back into lighter items. So the color for her is very stark, black and white, good and bad, pure and sullied.
I was trying to figure out with Norman if there's any kind of similar pattern, because he wears the dark sweater when he's talking to Arbogast, and he's dressed in a pure white shirt for the last scenes of the movie, but I don't think there's any real correlation.
I don't think so. At least none that I picked up on. I think a lot of filmmakers, Hitchcock especially, tend to have a focus on women and their clothes and the symbolism of their clothing. The basic read is dark evil, red sexual, white pure.
I was going to say Hitchcock having a hang-up with undressed women? That's crazy.
Oh, I know. Oh, actually, one other thing I wanted to bring up with color is the house itself is black, or it reads as black, and the motel reads as white. So it reads as a safe space, even though it is not at all. And Marion's final resting place in the lake is black. I mean, it's shot at night, and it appears to be tar. So she's being hidden again. Mm-hmm. She's hidden under a sin. Something about bathrooms that we didn't mention. It's really important, actually. They're mentioned so many times or seen so many times in this film. A very transgressive place. Norman cannot even say the word bathroom. He just kind of turns on the light and is like, here's the... You know, he can't even say it because to him it is a dirty place. And for Marion, she goes into the restroom at the car dealership, but she does it to hide the fact that she's taking some of the money to pay for this car. So she's doing these acts that she doesn't want seen, that people wouldn't normally see. She's hiding it in the bathroom. And of course, the bathroom scene comes up later. So bathrooms are a place for things that aren't the public viewing.
That reminds me, actually, that there was an interesting bit of foreshadowing I noticed this time, that when she's in her bedroom getting ready to go and contemplating stealing the money, she paces back and forth, and in the background we see her bathroom door open and the shower stall is right there. It's like that foreshadowing's right there. This is where this decision is gonna lead you.
Exactly.
You can also look at it as a way where Norman Bates going into the bathroom to kill Marion, that is also almost like a show of nowhere safe. She's allowed to get away with transgressions and her crimes by taking the $700 to pay for the car in the car dealership bathroom. But when she's trying to clean herself later, almost like cleaning herself of her sins, she decides she's going to bring the money back. It doesn't matter. She's not safe in there.
Right.
It kind of almost breaks down a barrier that I think at the time horror really hasn't seen yet. There was no safe space.
Yeah, there was always the sense of the bathroom as being a place of privacy
Right.
and safety, and no one's going to intrude on you there, and certainly that's not the case here. Okay, some trivia on the movie. The painting that Norman removes to spy on Marion in her room is Susanna and the Elders by Willem van Mieris, and depicts a scene from the Book of Daniel in which two elderly men are attempting to rape Susanna as she bathes. So again, perfectly thematically appropriate.
In the back office as well, there is a second painting where there's a woman who's trying to fig leaf herself as well. I don't know what the painting is, but
I think it might be the same scene in a different painting, because I
Depicted
know
a
there's been
different way.
different paintings of that particular moment.
Okay.
Because I noticed that too, that it looks like the same scene, but
Yeah, and it looks
in
a
a
little
different
like
style.
Titian.
Of course, Hitchcock makes his cameo in this film as the man in the cowboy hat outside of Marion's office. He kind of gets it out of the way pretty quickly in this one, I think, so it didn't distract from later on in the film to have people constantly on the hunt for him.
It's one of his quickest ones, for
It's
sure.
really fast, yeah. Hitchcock often put the dummies for Mother in Lee's makeup chair for when she came back for lunch. This was how he decided on what the final look would be. Lee commented that he was testing the effectiveness of the dummy by measuring her scream.
What a dick.
Well, this shouldn't be too shocking with Hitchcock.
It isn't shocking, but it does.
That's some William Friedkin.
It reminds me of the crap that Shelley Duvall was put through on the set of The Shining. This kind of like who cares? This woman is an actor. I'm not going to trust her to do her job. I'm going to elicit an authentic response from her. It's garbage.
Oh, yeah.
Norman's yell upon seeing Mother after Marion's death was accomplished by removing the bass frequencies from Perkins' voice to make him sound more like a teenager. And I love that tiny little detail that he's reverted into a kid at that one little moment.
Mother! Oh, God! Mother! Blood! Blood!
Honestly, it took me until the last viewing to understand that it wasn't him remembering that he'd seen blood, but that in his imagination, he was seeing the blood on Mother.
Yep.
That he was probably seeing it on his own hands, but at that moment, he perceived those hands as Mother.
Because Janet Leigh wasn't available, if you watch the trailer that we mentioned for the film, when Hitchcock pulls back the curtain and somebody screams, that's actually Vera Miles in a wig.
Really?
Yep. And when Norma asks for the blanket at the end of the movie, as the cop is leaning in, there's another cop standing on guard outside the door. If you look closely, that's Ted Knight, who you might recognize from the Mary Tyler Moore Show, or from Caddyshack, where he played Judge Smales, the bad guy. One of his early appearances in this movie. The film was originally only rated as approved back in the early rating system. It was reclassified as an M for mature audiences for the new letter system in 1968. And then in 1984, following a crackdown on screen violence after the whole Gremlins Temple of Doom kind of controversy, it was reclassified as an R, and it's pretty much stayed that way. Which is funny because it does feel, from the modern perspective, kind of tame for an R.
It does. I think some of it is the subject matter, the fact that honestly, this should be a PG-13 at this point in the rating system. It might be the notorious nature of the film that keeps it at an R.
It almost feels like it's doing it a favor by, no, we'll let it keep that reputation by hanging on to that rating.
I was going to say, by holding on to the R rating, it almost solidifies itself as like the original horror film, the original slasher.
One last little thing. Did you notice who the previous guest for the motel was before Marion Crane?
I did not.
I did.
It's Michael Scott. I can just imagine him staying there and making up some bizarre story. He'd probably talk Norman to death, actually. Norman would just kill him out of frustration. For the legacy of the film, in terms of the direction of Hitchcock's career, this and arguably The Birds are kind of the high watermark. I mean, he had been a huge success, obviously, for years, but I think these two are the ones that even people who don't watch his movies know of.
Yeah, you can quote these movies. You can the visualization of these movies are ingrained in any mainstream film fan. Everybody knows the first notes of Psycho.
It's referenced everywhere. Anytime there's a curtain pull, down to Clue, which we just saw and talked about recently. Whenever there's a curtain pull, we expect someone there.
We just watched Fade to Black, and there it is in that movie, too. And tons of slasher movies. The opening of The Funhouse is a spoof of this scene. Practically any De Palma movie for a little while from the 70s into the early 90s.
Notably Phantom of the Paradise, which we will be talking about someday, I promise.
We will get to it, yep.
Friday the 13th, Part 4.
Friday the 13th, Part 4. Going back to De Palma, there's Sisters, Dressed to Kill, Raising Cain. All three of those take heavy thematic stuff from this. We mentioned with Carpenter how much he borrowed for Halloween, not just Sam Loomis and a lot of the stylistic things, but he got Janet Leigh's daughter to be the heroine in that one. I don't think that's not by accident.
Oh, absolutely not.
And it's interesting to look at this in the wider view of how it seems like horror, it's not really well regarded as a genre, but then a big movie will come out that'll be a critical hit, but also a big commercial hit that pushes it forward and pushes the boundaries more. You have this one, and then next you get into Texas Chainsaw and The Exorcist, and those both push the boundaries. And Halloween pushes the boundaries, and Friday the 13th, and this is kind of the beginning of that, I think. And The Shining, yeah.
It's almost like, I call it like Oscar horror, or it's horror for like people that don't like horror. And I mean, you got Psycho, you got, like you said, and all those. I mean, then it even gets up to like now, like Get Out.
And that's where we get that like elevated horror that we see in the media a lot, because no one wants to admit that they like horror. That's why Stephen King books are categorized not in horror anymore, but in literature, because it's elevated beyond the genre kind of garbage. Like, just, it's wrong.
It's like the Silence of the Lambs joke, like the whole controversy of it's a thriller, is it a horror?
Right.
Yeah.
They almost don't want to call it horror. That's like a death note for the film. We call it thriller. It's a little more exciting.
There's another influence that I really wanted to talk about because I feel like it's so important. Scream.
Oh, absolutely.
Wes Craven's Scream. The gag of having Drew Barrymore as the first character we interact with and start to relate to. And we're like, yeah, she's the main character. This is great. I love Drew Barrymore. And then she's dead. That is a direct reference to the casting and the role of Janet Leigh as Marion. Even though it was suggested by Drew Barrymore so beautifully, it reads as a reference. It can't be anything else. And
there's a lot in that movie, in that series of movies, I think, that borrows from that. That first one, certainly that idea, that Hitchcockian idea of evil and madness in a very mundane, normal-seeming place, right down to the fact that one of the villains is named Billy Loomis.
Exactly.
And then we have the sequels. After many, many years, I think it was...
82.
82, so yeah, 22 years, Perkins came back to film Psycho 2, written by Tom Holland, who would later do Fright Night and Child's Play, and directed by Richard Franklin. And the big surprise is Psycho 2 is actually really goddamn good.
It is fantastic.
I haven't seen...
You haven't seen it?
No.
Oh, you need to see this.
I haven't seen any of the sequels. Any of the sequels.
Psycho 2 is inarguably a fantastic sequel. It honors the spirit of the first film while allowing the character to age and mature in ways.
And again, really puts you on Norman Bates' side. You feel so much for him in that sequel. Perkins himself would direct Psycho 3, which not as good. Really some odd, strange stuff in there, but kind of interesting. And for TV, Mick Garris directed Psycho 4: The Beginning, this prequel that has Norman Bates calling into a radio talk show and describing his past, which we see brought to life with Henry Thomas playing young Norman Bates. And Thomas is really great, too.
He is. I'm glad you reminded me because I couldn't remember what Psycho 4 was about, but it was surprisingly good because whenever you're like, oh, the origins, it's like, but we kind of already know. Do I need to see any more of this? But it worked very well. And actually written by Joseph Stefano again. And they brought in Olivia Hussey to play Norma Bates, and she was great too. And we have the TV spinoffs. There was actually a pilot for a show called Bates Motel starring Bud Cort, who played a patient at the same mental hospital that Norman Bates was. And in that reality, Norman Bates had died and willed him the motel and the house. And it was going to be like this sort of anthology show where a different person was going to show up at the motel each week with their own weird little story. And I remember Lori Petty was in the first one. Not a great pilot. They kind of destroy the continuity. There's a scene midway through the pilot where they dig up Norma Bates's body
on the ground somehow, that somehow her body had ended up back in the ground underneath the house. It didn't make a lot of sense. But then there's the other Bates Motel TV show with Vera Farmiga and Freddie Highmore, which actually brings to life what we were discussing, the idea that Norma isn't quite what we come to understand her to be in the film, that she's actually pretty normal, and Norman's the one who is misperceiving what his mother is like.
It was a series I was very skeptical about. I'm not a huge fan of retranslating the same story over and over, but it does not do that. And it's acted very well. The writing is good. It's a great show.
I haven't finished Bates Motel, but one thing I will say about it was Freddie Highmore really elevates the material. It could have easily collapsed and failed, but I think without the performance of Freddie Highmore, which, like Perkins before him, does his own thing. It's just very impressive to see a TV show with that high caliber of acting.
For me, it's Farmiga. I loved her on that show. And
Farmiga's amazing.
There are points where she literally brought me to tears watching that show. And we have to discuss it. There's the Gus Van Sant remake.
We don't have to discuss it.
I mean, we already did discuss it, right?
Well, on the one hand, I'll say, before it had come out, I kind of respected it as the kind of stunt that Hitchcock might have found funny, the idea he's going to do a shot-for-shot remake. And it's funny, watching the movie, the original one again today, I realized how little of that remake actually is shot-for-shot.
It really is not shot-for-shot. I think saying it was shot-for-shot was part of the gimmick. And colorizing it is just such a mistake. And I will now talk about the color. Why orange? Why green? Why such vibrant and distracting and vicious colors? Because I found it just lurid, not in the right way, and distracting. It took me out of everything.
I also think it's shocking, too, that this came from Gus Van Sant.
I know.
Who overall is a very muted director. His colors are very gray.
Yeah.
Like, most of his films are very, very, very non-vibrant.
He bases a lot of his look in reality, and those colors felt out of reality.
It just felt like shocking, even more so that this was Gus Van Sant, because if it was anybody to take a movie like Psycho and remake it and make it interesting, Gus Van Sant's that guy. It's shocking that he would do it just a shot by shot. Well, not really, but like a beat by beat remake. It's almost similar to like what the Luca, whatever, I forgot his last name, but Luca did with Suspiria. Right. If there's anybody that I was expecting to make it like amazing but unique, it was him, but it just felt off.
So while Hitchcock seemed to be using the story of Psycho as an exercise in how to make a horror film the way Hitchcock would make a horror film, it seems like Van Sant was doing something very similar. I don't think was successful. I kind of hate this. There's a little bit of an art movement during a brief window of time where conceptually artists were exploring the idea of what makes a piece of art your own. When is the artist's hand visible? Does it matter? I wish I could remember, and I should have looked this up, but I didn't. I apologize. There was a photographer who took photographs of photographs. And I mean, not like from back, but just framed perfectly as a photograph of a photograph, and he would hang them as his own work, or she would hang them as her own work. And it opened up a dialogue as to what made this work different from the other work. Is it a stolen piece at this point? Is it plagiarism? And I think Van Sant was trying to play with that, but because he doesn't go all the way shot by shot, he falls short of that exercise.
It's funny because that reminds me of an art installation I read about where it was a motion picture, and they took one frame from the motion picture and would show it for an hour and then move on to the next one, move on to the next one. And the movie was the original Psycho.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just shocked that post Good Will Hunting, that this is what Van Sant used his clout for. Of all things, he could probably have gotten any project he wanted running, and he did this. I will say, in its small defense, I actually really like what Julianne Moore and Viggo Mortensen do with their characters. That not in the original one, but Moore has this great thing where Viggo is constantly kind of hanging on her and like flirting with her, and she's having none of it. And that I thought was kind of funny because it's not in the dialogue or anything like that. It's just in gestures and looks. And it's one of the few interesting things I find about that remake.
I will also give Vince Vaughn credit. He tried.
He did.
He really, really
tried.
He was
just not the guy.
If anything, it makes it more depressing that he didn't totally suck. Because you almost want to say, oh, he just none of it worked. But he doesn't not work. It's just he's just not good in a not good movie.
He was miscast. I do think that the entire cast, these are wonderful actors who somehow just didn't work for this script. I don't know if it was the direction style or if they were hyper conscious that they were remaking a masterpiece, but whatever the case was, it just didn't all fall together. What worked for Viggo Mortensen and Julianne Moore is that the two characters they got to play with didn't have very much established. I mean, when you think of Psycho, you think of Marion and you think of Norma/Norman. All the other characters don't have a lot of stuff going on, so the actors can bring more to it.
And Viggo seemed to choose to play Sam as an asshole, which I think was actually a great choice.
That's the best choice of the film, to be honest with you.
But, I mean, the Bates Motel TV show shows that you could have remade Psycho and done some great stuff with it. You didn't have to do this shot-for-shot thing. And the last thing to mention is, of course, the Universal Studios tour, where even now you can go see the Bates Motel and the original Bates Mansion. And, oh, one of these days we're going to make it there, damn it. I so want to see that. Okay, what's everybody's favorite scene?
So my favorite scene is really more of a sequence, so I'm just going to briefly outline it. Marion is on the run. She's just gotten through changing her car and she feels like she's getting away from the cops, and there's just all of this rain that's obscuring her vision, and it's showing her internal state of mind. At the same time, it's establishing her reasons for needing to stop, and it's a tell to the audience that we're moving into a different phase of the movie. And there's just something about that much rain that makes you feel trapped. And in this moment, she is trapped on all sides. She's trapped by her own choices. She's trapped by the weather. And it's a beautiful, beautiful scene.
Kyle?
Yeah, actually, that was my second favorite scene in the film. So, my favorite scene in the film, though, it's actually right before that, when she's getting the car. I don't want to sound like an absolute pretentious asshole here, but I feel like I don't really see a lot of people talk about the car scene that much, but it's such an intensity to just how simple it is. Her trying to buy a car from a salesman. The salesman's obviously sketched out by her. You have the cop that they constantly cut back and forth to the cop looking at her. There's just such a tension of being watched that then carries on until her death scene.
That's the one I'd have picked for you myself.
How much?
Go ahead, spin it around the block.
It looks fine. How much would it be with my car?
You mean you don't want the usual day and a half to think it over? You are in a hurry, aren't you? Somebody chasing you?
Of course not. Please.
Well, it's the first time the customer ever high-pressured the salesman. Figure roughly your car plus $700.
$700.
You always got time to argue money, huh?
All right.
I take it you can prove that car is yours. I mean, out-of-state license and all. You got your pink slip and
I believe I have the necessary papers.
And for me, that car scene, her buying the car, her going to the bathroom to get the $700, and her driving away and then stopping really quick because she almost hit someone. And it's so, like, I don't know. I feel like that just sets the mood for the next scene and everything that follows until her death.
I'm glad you mentioned that scene, because a lot of the dealer's issues with her seem to stem from the fact that she was a woman and she was decisive and she was forceful.
Yep, exactly. And I think it's such a subtly intense scene.
Yeah.
It's just a lot going on without a lot being shown. And I think it's phenomenal.
And I love the subtle details. Like, I never picked up before that she gets the newspaper to look to see if it's been reported as a crime yet. And she's tearing through it, trying to find out if her crime is known yet. Meanwhile, you have that cop right across the street, and she doesn't know he's there, but we as the audience know, and know that he's watching.
Yeah, and they're like the small stuff of shoving the newspaper in there, the hiding the money, and the aggressiveness of her doing it is so, I don't know, it's the subtlety of everything in that scene is just phenomenal.
All right, I have some real trouble with this one because my favorite shot of the movie is not my favorite scene, so I'm just going to focus on the scene. And it's actually the scene right after yours, Corinne, when she pulls up to the Bates Motel for the first time.
So everything is surrounded by that.
I know, that whole little section of the movie.
All three of our favorite scenes are sequential. That's phenomenal.
I just love that gradual reveal of we see the sign first, and then we move in closer and we see the motel itself. And in that shot, you have the sign, the motel, and you can't see the house at all. It's just pitch black. This is just void where the house is going to be in a second. And then as she pulls up and gets out, and then we finally see the house, and that creepy, creepy distant shot of Norman in the window pacing back and forth dressed as Mother. Like you said, it is kind of an introduction into a whole new phase of the movie, and it's so beautiful. Just that intercutting of her staring at this as she gets closer and closer. Even before we know what's going to happen, we feel a dread about this location, that something terrible is going to happen from here on in the film.
Another great thing about the scene, too, is in any other movie, the sight of a motel would be comfort. That would be a sigh of relief. Oh, I'm safe from the rain. I'm safe. This is going to shield me until the morning. But in here, the silence in the soundtrack that we mentioned earlier really just brings out the uncomfortableness of the place. That Marion is almost not really comfortable being there, but she has no other choice.
That sense that she's totally alone. There's nobody else there at that motel.
Yeah.
Which is actually alluded to. The first time the policeman pulls her over, she kind of chastises her. Why didn't you stay at one of the motels in this area? And he verbatim says, just to be safe. And it's the very opposite of what she should have been doing. Sleeping in her car would have been so much more safe.
I hadn't thought of that, but yeah. Okay, recommendations. If somebody digs Psycho, what's another film they should see?
From the same year, I know I mentioned it earlier, it's very important. Peeping Tom in 1960, directed by Michael Powell. This is the kind of film that did very similar things as Psycho in that it's looking at sexual transgressions and murder. But the difference is our point of view. Our point of view in Peeping Tom is through the killer. So it's putting an audience in a position where we are also part of this crime. We are the perpetrators as well. And that made audiences very uncomfortable. That, and I do believe it was a British production.
It was.
And it highlights the difference between the obscenity laws in Britain at the time and Hollywood standards. As an exercise in horror films of the 1960s, I would definitely do a double feature.
Yeah, I'm hoping to cover that one at some point in the future, definitely.
I would actually recommend a movie that if you wanted to go darker, if you want to go a little more evil, but the same basis of a man that is split personalities or is tied by someone, I would go to the 1980 Maniac.
Oh,
it's a good one.
That is a good one.
Joe Spinell, honestly, he's like the grindcore version of Anthony Perkins, Norman Bates. As someone that loves independent and underground horror and just absolutely brutal stuff, like it's basically if someone saw Psycho and like, that's not enough for me. So I would definitely Maniac 1980, 100%.
I will say he is one of the most, you look at him in that movie and feel like, yeah, this is what a serial killer is probably really like.
Oh yeah.
I have two, actually, both of which focus on the idea of dissociative identity disorder. First of all, Magic, directed by Richard Attenborough, with Anthony Hopkins as a ventriloquist who's kind of a rising star in the comedy world, who runs away from his success when he starts to realize it might shine too much of a light on his mental problems, including his really unhealthy relationship with his dummy Fats. Everyone points to Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter as his creepy role. To me, this is his scary role. He is amazing in this and actually learned ventriloquism. And it's just startling how good he is at it. And the Fats personality is just so creepy. The other one is a film I don't really feel like got as much attention as it deserved. Peacock, directed by Michael Lander, starring Cillian Murphy as a man who has multiple personalities, one male, one female, and is able to hide it from this small town until this accident puts him right into the town's spotlight, and he's forced to try and convince everyone in town that his two personalities are man and wife. Cillian is amazing in it, and it has to be said, when he's a woman, he's pretty goddamn attractive. But it's a fascinating movie.
I've actually never heard of that one. I'm gonna check
it's incredible. I think it was, 98, 99, something like
2010, actually.
Oh, okay, so I was off by a decade.
It also has like Susan Sarandon and Ellen Page. It's very, very good. Okay, Kyle, where can people find your work on the internet?
All right, so if you go to the Boston Hassle website, just type in my name, Kyle Brunet, and you'll find all of my articles. I also have a Twitter handle, @Brunet_Kyle, so that's super easy to remember. But basically, I tweet a lot of nonsense on there, but most of my work is on the Boston Hassle. So you just look up Boston Hassle, go on the website, look at my name, you'll find me. Okay, that ends our conversation, but not the discussion. If you'd like to have your say about Psycho or feel that we missed something, check out the comment section for this episode on CinemaSpection.com and start talking. You can email your comments, complaints, questions, and suggestions to CinemaSpection@gmail.com.
You can also like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter at CinemaSpection. For our personal accounts, I'm at TimosaurusR.
I'm at the Lady Latte.
You can check out our Instagram account at CinemaSpection. Our show is available on both Apple Podcasts and Stitcher, so if you like what you hear, please subscribe. And if you have a moment, please leave us a review there. We appreciate your feedback, and your reviews help increase our visibility. We'll be back to discuss another movie next time. Until then, thanks for listening, and remember to keep watching closely. There's more to a movie than what's on the screen.
Are you sure you wouldn't like to stay just a little while longer? Just for talk?